In the morning, citizens out there, broadcasting live from the heart of Qumulo Hill Country. My name's Will Stroh, Principal Support Engineer. And joining me today is my fellow Qumulon and Command Line Critter, Solutions Architect Joe Costa.
Hello.
Today we'll be diving into the world-famous QQ API and how you can use it for everyday tasks. At least I'm pretty sure they use it in Tanzania. I'm pretty sure they've at least heard of it. Now, we also do have a special anniversary call out to Chris and Topeka. I hope he's going to enjoy it at some point. Maybe he'll at least check the video and get his call out. Hope you have a good one out there, my friend, and many more years to you and yours. All right, if you guys do have any special shout-outs, birthday wishes, or hidden agendas, feel free to send us a message at care@qumulo.com. We'll see about getting it in there next month. Now, here at Qumulo, we do use the API 365 days a year, which is almost every day, if you think about it. So it's kind of near and dear to our heart. And Joe is going to be, he's got a laser pointer. So if you do have a cat in your office with you, you might want to get them out of the office. All right. And with that, we're going to do this a little funky today. We are going to go through some slides here, but we are also going to have some live demo action sprinkled throughout. Also, there are quite a few real life example cases that we're going to be covering. What I am doing is creating up a KB article, which will be linked in the description of the YouTube video once it gets posted out there. So don't think you have to screen capture and then retype everything. I'm retyping it all for you. So that's just one of many benefits we give you here for free at Qumulo. So once this does go live on the YouTube channel, just click on the show more or description or whatever it is those kids click on these days. And that'll have a link out there to that one for you. Also, my 7-year-old tells me it is physically impossible to smash that subscribe button enough times. So if you haven't already, please feel free to hit that and you'll get notified. You hit the bell, I guess, every time we post a new video out there. All right. So with that being said, let's talk about the API. So all commands on Qumulo, from version to AD list, exports, all that jive, those are all presented also out through the REST API. And with that, there's a couple different ways you can access those. One is going straight through the SSH to the console, but that's kind of dangerous to think about it, because you're just going out there and next thing you know, you're going to accidentally paste something in the SSH window, and it's not going to be a good day out there. So we do have a QQ executable, which will replace that need. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is, if you are using Azure native Qumulo clusters, also known as Qumulo as a service, you don't have SSH sessions to those. So your only route to administrative tasks is either going to be the GUI or through the QQ API. This can be run on a host of different machines out there. The common ones, Windows, Linux, and Macs, obviously. I don't know. I've never actually tried on a Solaris box, but it might work if that's still a thing. We do send it over port 8000. It's encrypted, as you can see, and it works with Python, these versions out there. Hey, Joe, do you know how you can tell the difference between a BOA and a Python?
Version number? I don't know.
The BOA has feathers.
Oh.
You didn't know you were coming here for jokes today, did you? All right. Well, if you're not paying attention, raise your hand. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so here's what you need to do if you don't do it already. There's a link to Python for you. Again, we can post this stuff up later. You can download the API out of the web UI. Honestly, I prefer to do it via the pip install if you do have pip installed on there. The one thing to keep in mind is the API is tied into the version. So for the most part, it should be backwards compatible. There are a few things. I mean, if you were going to go from version 7 to version 4, there's probably going to be a lot of stuff that doesn't work. I haven't personally tried that, but my guess is that's going to be the case. If you do the pip versioning there, you can do just pip 3 install Qumulo_API equal the new version, and it'll keep things up to date out there. It'll download the new one. You're good to go.
That's another nice thing about installing it via pip is that it automatically adds it to your path. So you can just type QQ and it's going to be a command that your command line already understands. So you don't have to add it to the path by hand. So another plus for using pip.
Alrighty. Now, these are not recommended, or not required rather, but recommended. Let me flip my words around there. If you do this install arg complete and then activate it out there, that will give you the automatic command line completion where you hit tab and it pulls the next thing out. So if you're really bad with typing like I am, then this is a savior for you. Also, if you want to get really fancy, which we do have a slide on this at the tail end here, showing you just some cool things you can do with it. JQ is highly recommended at that point. You don't necessarily need to fully understand JQ. I've been doing it for 5 years now, and I very much consider myself a neophyte at it. But it is something that once you kind of understand where you're going with it, you can figure things out. So again, not required, but highly recommended.
And kind of a bummer note here, but these Python are complete. It's really for Linux and Mac. It's not going to help you a whole lot on the Windows install. Just FYI.
That's a good point. So go off and install Linux somewhere, and then you're good to go. All right. Now, QQ itself, as we said with the pip3, doing the versioning out there, you are going to have a version with it. So again, most of the time it should be backwards compatible, but if you are going one of those huge jumps, you might run into problems with that. We had a customer recently who finally upgraded everything to a 6. Release from old 3. Releases. Would it have worked backwards to their 3. Releases? Probably not in a nice manner, if you will.
So here's a quick demo of what we're talking about. I have the QQ command installed on my Mac here. And this is the version of the QQ command itself, right? So not necessarily the version that's running on your cluster, because QQ that you run locally is not going to be kept in sync with whatever versions you have running on your cluster unless you actually update it manually.
Which is a good thing to keep in mind. So if you do upgrade your cluster, you probably want to go update the API as well. There are going to be additional calls that get put out there. Some things they may sunset certain API calls, so you'll have a couple versions that they'll work with, and they'll stop working at some point. So it is something to keep in mind. If you installed QQ after this webinar, I think we got 7.1.4 out there right now, for example, and then in 2 years' time, you upgrade your cluster a few times in between there, but never upgrade QQ. Well, your QQ is going to be outdated at that point. So you would want to go back in there and run that pip install command on it.
So
now,
yeah,
go for it.
Well, you want to do this one?
Oh, you're fine.
All right. So instead of you actually typing the whole path or doing something like Python /path to whatever QQ got installed, you can actually create an alias that kind of saves you a little bit of time. So for example, in my own cluster here, I turned the term QQW to mean this entire thing here. So I have where my QQ lives, and then I have my host, which is something that you have to provide when you're running QQ remotely. You have to say QQ host and then the FQDN or IP address of your node. And in this case, I then also pointed to where my credentials are being stored. This way, when I type QQW, it goes specifically to the cluster called webinar, while I could create something called QQ other cluster that then points to another cluster. So if you're going to do that to Linux and Mac, you want to add it to either bash rc or bash profile, assuming that you're using bash as your shell, or if you're using some other kind of shell, then just follow whatever process for that shell is. But I'll give you an example of what that looks like, because I did that to Windows, and here are the directions to do that for Windows PowerShell. And I would strongly recommend any Python, anything you do with PowerShell, that you use PowerShell 7 for that. will make your life a lot easier than using the old PowerShell 5. But don't worry about writing any of the stuff down. It's going to be available to you later. But in this case, I created a new PowerShell profile that then creates the same kind of thing here. So QQW in this case means that particular cluster. So if you take a quick peek here, instead of me having to type QQ dash dash host some cluster blah 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 blah, I just created an alias that says QQW, and I can say node state get, just like in this case here, and it goes right into my cluster and it tells me that I'm good to go and connected to it. So making aliases will make your life a lot easier because you're probably going to get tired of doing this type of stuff here, right? So that's a quick tip for you.
I'm tired of it already. I haven't typed anything. Okay, dokes. With RBAC and QQ there, the data admin role is a great user for it. Most of the API use can get pulled in there. If you only want your intern having read-only access, throw them on an observer role. It'll, again, work for everything outside of debug stuff, which, you know what, your intern shouldn't be dealing with that anyhow. So tell them to enjoy their observer role and be happy they got it. If you really want to get frisky with it, you can certainly do a custom role out there, and that does let you fine-tune things to the least privilege. Or if they do have Active Directories users out there, you can just throw those into those roles also, and kind of save everyone some grief if you're trying to do main or local users for them on that one. If you already have the user out there, great, go to town on it.
So what do we mean by RBAC in this case? So here's my cluster. If you go to your cluster and you go to the cluster tab, role management, you have, let me refresh that sucker. You can create different roles that have different rights. So just click on a create role here and you see all the different privileges that you can grant a user. Each one of these privileges also determine whether a user has the right to perform something via QQ or via the API. So in this case, when you're dealing with QQ and you have you want to delegate someone to have a smaller scope of responsibility on the cluster, you don't necessarily need to make that user a full administrator. You can just pick exactly which rights that user should have. This way, you don't necessarily have to give the keys to the kingdom to every user just for them to be able to use QQ.
And certainly, if you do have any questions during any of this, feel free to throw them in the Q&A. I got it open another window now because I figured out how to finally use it properly. So don't let my knowledge go for naught here. Alrighty. So let's log into this thing. It's pretty straightforward, and Joe kind of covered a little bit of this already. I'm coming in from my host named Ben Chicken. I do a QQ-host, give it the host IP address, I tell it I want to log in, which is going to be my command I'm sending over to it, and what user I'm coming in as. You could certainly do a -p password on the command line here if you want to, but that will get logged into your history and whatnot. So you probably don't want to do that. I'll just throw it out there. Now, this will go ahead and create a credential file out there, and your authentication token is valid for 10 hours at that point. Now, if you do want to, you can make a longer lived one, which you can also throw out in that cred file if you need to. But 10 hours is kind of, well, it's as long as the USDA says you should be in front of a computer on a daily basis. So 10 hours is pretty good.
But if you have an automated process that's running behind the scenes, like on some script that does a thing for you every now and then you definitely want to create a long-lived one. And just as a reminder, you only need to log in once. So you don't have to provide login uadmin and then the command at the end. Login itself is the command. And once you do this one time, then you can just run all the other commands.
And here's how you'd go about doing that access token. In this case, we're coming in as a user Bigfoot. We're giving them an expiration date way into the future out here. and saying where we're keeping it at, then we copy it over there. Now, as pointed out here, this is pushed out only once, so you better save it. If you don't save it, you can rerun this again and create another access token, but then you'll have a bunch of access tokens floating around out there. And as you can see, you only get a maximum of 2 of them. So probably don't make the expiration time too far out there. You probably don't want to do like 2030 or something. Keep it reasonable.
And you can list your tokens. So if you do an on-off list access tokens, you get to list all the different tokens that you have. Oh, I need to log in. Let me do in this one then. QQM list access tokens. All right, let me log in.
You successfully bested yourself.
Yeah, I think actually I need to look at my QQQ node state get. We'll do live. All right, I can actually connect to that one. So let me off list access tokens, and it's going to tell me I need to log in again. So let me do that. Fine. There you go. So you can list all the tokens that you have. You have the name of the user and you have the ID. You can get information by providing this ID. There's a command called auth get access token. You won't show you the access token, but we'll show you who created it, who it belongs to. It basically has the same type of information that you have over here. But you can see that I have 2 different, Batman cannot get another token because I already have 2 tokens for Batman. And then you can also use this ID if you want to delete a token. The input for the command to delete a token would be the actual ID number of the token.
So once you get logged in there, yeah, Joe, you want to go for it?
No, have at it.
Okay. Once you get logged in there, you can use normal -h -help, and it'll return you a list of commands just like it would normally if you SSH into the cluster itself. If you do need to, look for a replication is always my big bugbear. I can never remember if it's list, target, source, whatever. So I would just do a grep on the help and find out what it is. That's why it's there. So similarly, you can do that with your Linux and Mac clients there. You can pipe it through grep. On Windows, you can pipe it through select string and give it some amount of characters there that you're looking for. So again, nothing really out of the norm here. This is still straight up just normal administration. You can, it's the exact same thing you could do on box if you wanted to. So this really is making it a little bit easier on that front.
Mm-hmm. So you just do a QQ and then H. You get all the commands, and it's a big old list of them. These commands tend to be named pretty much for the category of what the command does. So in this case, he's talking about replication. I will type replication, and any command that has anything to do with replication will be listed. There's quite a few of them. Now, this is probably not the best way to really read all this information. So to that end, we have a brand new page in Docs that lists all the different commands. And it's pretty cool because it's going to be kept up to date automatically. So if you want to check this out, it has the same information you get with the QQ-H, except there's a nice and easier to read web page. Now, a thing to note is that every single QQ command has some help text, but a lot of the more complex commands will be context aware, meaning that if I already type part of the command and then I give it another -H, I actually get more help information. So a good example of that is if I pop in here and let's do, what's the one I'm looking for? So FS modify ACL, good old FS modify ACL. I give it a help or a dash H by itself. I have some help text, but then if I give it a positional argument like add entry, and then I give it another dash H, you actually see that my help text has changed based on what I have already typed in. So it's worth exploring because you get some extra information that might not be obvious that you have if you just look at the first part of the help. So it's always worth checking it out to see if there's some more help text for you in there. Off to you, Will.
So here we're just doing some simple common tasks. Like in this case, we're saying, hey, what are my SMB settings out there? Again, as you can see, we do the QQ. We give it a host IP address or the host name. I'm not in DNS on my cluster, so that's why I'm throwing IPs out here. And you simply just throw whatever command you're looking for. So in this case, SMB get settings. It goes out there, queries against the cluster, and returns back what we got here. Again, nothing magical about this, nothing hidden or super complicated. These are just common things that you'd be doing, and it's pretty straightforward. So in this case, if my friendly support engineer said, "Oh, you know what, we should probably check bypass reverse checking because we're trying to access a lower thing on the directory structure there," I can say, "Oh, well, take this support guy. I already got it turned on to true, so it must be something else." So if nothing else, really what you've learned today is how to one-up your support engine. There you go. Okie dokes. Now we're doing just some more generic common tasks here. In this case, we're doing add share, and we're specifying everything you would from the command line normally. Again, you give it a name, you give it a file system path. In this case, we're creating the file system path if it doesn't exist already, throwing out some access there and some full control hosts. A lot of this stuff you can it's probably easier, if I'm honest, to if you're not trying to script it, it'd be easier just to go through the GUI at that point and go that route. But this is something if you need to script, let's say you work for a university and you have 10,000 students coming in. Well, option one is you could simply hire an intern at $4.25 an hour, or whatever minimum wage is these days, and let them handle this. Or you could go ahead and script this up and then kick back and hang out by the pool and wait for the jack to roll in.
And one thing too is that sometimes the QQ will give you access to extra options that might not be available through the GUI. So the create share is actually a pretty good example. So if I do an SMB list shares and I take a look at that guy, so here let's find out how this share works. I need to give it a share ID. I'm going to give it ID 2 that I got at the top right there. And this one doesn't have any rules here. So let me go back to the example on the UI here. So you see how you were actually able to grant network access controls to a share, which is not something you can do through the GUI, which basically means I'm giving my users access to a new share, but they have to be coming from this particular network. So if you're not coming from this subnet, then you don't have access to this share. Now, this is not a thing that we can currently do on the user interface, but you can do it through the QQ CLI. So quite often you get extra access to stuff that you normally wouldn't be able to do through the GUI. So it's always worth exploring to see what other tools we have in there. So here's a popular one. You want to see who's connected to your server. And you can do network list connections. And let me give you an example of what that looks like here. So let me clear this off. I'm going to do a network. Actually, let me do the network list connections. And here's a bunch of different clients connected to it. And this command is kind of interesting. So I'm going to pop back into the presentation here that a lot of the commands have different output formats depending on the task that you're trying to get accomplished. So this is a good example that networkless connections has a standard table view like what we just saw, but then I can give it a -C flag that gives me a per node connection count. So if I run that in this guy here, so let's say QQW network list connections with the C. It shows me the individual nodes and who's connected to it. And I can also get the raw version of that, which is given it the JSON flag. And that outputs the raw JSON flag, which will be the output that you want if you're going to feed this command into another command down the road. And this is where something like JQ will come in handy, where you can do some sort of extra formatting here. So this will show me the different keys that I got on this JSON blob up there. So it's always worth exploring. Again, if you give it a --help, it will tell you what options you have for a particular command. So if I do that again here, then you see that I have counts or the raw JSON format. So it's, again, another thing to keep in mind.
Is there --help to make you have a keyboard built in this century, Joe?
Because can you hear my slamming of the keys? Actually,
I hear your slamming of the keys.
Oh, it's crazy because I'm using my headset and it comes right through my headset. Let me type softly, gently. I'll type gently.
That is a classic mechanical keyboard you have, my friend.
Chaka, 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 chaka. So, is a couple important notes here. Many of the QQ commands take a path as an input, obviously because you want to interact with your files. Now, we require POSIX style path separators. So / leans this way, even if you are running on the Windows client. We are not going to work with these slashes going the Microsoft way. We got to do the slashes going the Linux way. Now, all paths are relative from the root of the Qumulo file system. What this means is that every path that you give as input is starting from the very base of your Qumulo's shared file system. So everything is always relative from the root. And these paths are case sensitive. So it's important. Case sensitivity is going to be important here. It is not possible for us to deliver tab completion for anything that takes -- path, because tab completion in this case is going to be relative to the system you're running this on. So even if you SSH into a Qumulo node and you're running QQ on the node itself, there's no way to provide tab completion for the path, because they're all relative to your actual local machine. So if I were to give a command like QQ fs read directory --path, if I start hitting tab here, I'm going to get the stuff that's on my Mac and not what's on the Qumulo. So just keep that in mind.
So here we're just going through and doing a walk tree on the system. You can think of it as listing directories. You could also do a similar thing if you wanted to get a little more control over it, I guess. If you were to do like a FS reader or an FS reader aggregates at that point. But here we're doing a walk tree of the whole file system coming off / and just letting it burn through to see what we have out there. We have size, types, what it is the directory is a file, what the file ID is. And as Joe mentioned, there's a lot of options that you can add into these things. So if you did need to have ownership on there, if you need an output file, all of that can be done. Now, as I alluded to early on at the tail end of this webinar, and then we'll have it linked in the YouTube video. There are some cool things you can do with JSON where you can actually get the output, and you can just throw this straight over to an Excel file at that point. So when your CEO comes along and says, "Okay, I need to know how many directories I have out there called warehouse or whatever," you could run something like this very quickly and pull that information up. Now, and that's not to say you couldn't do any of this through the Windows command line or find on your Linux box. But because this does remove protocols out of the equation, it is much faster.
If you ever need to enumerate a directory that has 100,000 things in it, that's not going to be the fastest if you're going through like your Linux box and trying to ls something. So this would be quite a bit faster. So here's a good example here. I'm going to do a QQW FS walk tree, and I'm going to go right to the bottom of this sucker here. And, I was listing the entire directory, and it's pretty performant. So, and then you can do some things with this output. I could have given a display all attributes to get some extra attributes like the change time and ownership and all. Oh, let me go back over here. What is it called? Display all attributes. So not underscores, but dashes. I make this mistake all the time. Then you get more information, and it makes it really hard for us to read in here, but you get some extra info, like whether it's a symlink or that's something, what the change time is, creation time, all that type of stuff. Obviously, it's a terrible example, hard to read here, but it gives you an idea of the type of info that you can get with that tool. So it's a pretty handy thing for you to navigate through a directory, and has the all-important max depth attribute that sets just how far are we going to navigate down the directory tree. Some of our Qumulo clusters out there have, billions and billions of files. We definitely don't want to wait for the whole day for us to navigate through a massive directory because we started at the root.
I'm getting paid by the hour, Joe. I'm leaving off that max depth.
There you go.
Just letting that thing ride. Okay, so here we're going to go through and just manage permissions on here. You can again, these are common tasks you would normally do, and we're just showing that you can do them through the QQ CLI at this point. So here we're doing a get ACL on accounting, seeing who has permissions out there. In this case, webinar, domain users, and everyone. If you did want to save this output off to a JSON file, both this one and the NFS one will let you save raw format out there for adding in at a later date if you wanted to, or if you needed to.
Mm-hmm. And we also have, so in the ACL family of commands, these are the ones you'd use to modify an entry. There's an interesting behavior about this particular tool, is that it does not automatically traverse the directory tree and propagate the permission changes that you make with this tool. So this lets you surgically modify the permissions of one particular object. So it's a great tool for you to just snipe an entry. And if you ever had to deal with the Windows security dialog box, and you know that if you're about to change permissions at the top level of a directory, that you might spend a whole bunch of time propagating these permissions. But this tool allows you to just directly modify one entry, which is nice. In this case, if I wanted to add something to the root directory of Qumulo, again, I can see how this command works. So it's asking for a trustee, which is who am I going to add in here? And there's all kinds of different flavors of trustees that I can add. And then what right would that user have? Would you be allowed or denied? And what the rights are. There's all kinds of different rights you can have, including all for everything. And do you want to make that right inheritable in the future? So this is a really nice way, despite the number of things you have to type in there, it's actually a really nice way for you to just surgically modify one set of permissions. We do have different scripts that will allow you to mass propagate permissions, but the QQ tool, you should consider that to be like an X-Acto knife for you to just do one little thing versus a chainsaw that you're going to use to cut through an entire massive cluster effectively.
Yeah, as we open the call here today, we were mentioning how with Azure native Qumulo clusters, you would need to certainly use this QQ functionality. I suppose the other option is you could just call us up and ask us to run commands for you every time you need something, but that's not really scalable at the end of the day. So save you a lot of effort and grief if you just went down this road. So with this, here we're showing we're just going to add a user initially. We're in this case we're calling it S3 test. Give it a password out there. Then we create an access key for it. And this access key is going to let us actually connect over there via S3 at this point. Again, absolutely required if you are doing any ANQ or Azure native Qumulo clustering, because again, you're not going to have SSH access out there to create these things. So you will absolutely have to use the QQ API at that point. I'll click on the next couple here. We're just going
Mm-hmm.
through the motions of things.
Yeah, for sure. Just the one thing about this particular command is that, again, this is one of those commands where you only see this one time. So when you create an S3 key, this is the only time you're going to get this output. So save that output because you would not be able to get that again. You have to delete the key and create a new one if you want to see the secret access key again.
And when you are setting things up in your S3 buckets and whatnot, it will ask you for an access key ID and the secret access key. So, you don't need to hold on to them indefinitely, but you will certainly need them for that initial connection out there, and should you want to change anything up later. So again, here we're just going in, querying, saying, hey, let's list our access keys. What do we got out there? In this case, I have two different ones. Just judging off those auth IDs out there. One is the user I just created, the S3 test, and the other one is going to be my admin user in this case, but you may or may not have multiple ones out there. Don't judge this too harshly for what you should be expecting to see. And again, you can also, as with a lot of the commands, you can throw the JSON on there. If you were looking for something specific, if you had 100 different access keys, it's going to be a lot easier to parse on the output as opposed to just dumping it all and taking a look through there. So it is something to keep in mind with a lot of the commands on the Qumulo. You can always throw that --JSON on the tail end of it and see what it's doing. Likewise, and we didn't actually cover this in here, but if you were to have an SSH session out to your Qumulo, and before the command, if you did a sudo QQ --debug, it will show you the API call that we're doing. So in the case of S3 list access keys, if you have that --debug there, but you're not sure which API to call, you could always SSH over there and then run that.
So, for example, I have the nice standby here, node state get. And if I give it a --debug, you get to see all kinds of extra. Oh, I got to do it in front of the command. So --debug, and you get all the headers that were sent. This is the actual raw API call, effectively. Which user bearer the token you used, all that type of stuff. So if you find that a command is not working for whatever reason, you can give it a --debug, and you might get some further information to help you figure out why things are not working.
And so in this case here, we're pulling off of the. Joe's gonna make me do it from memory now. We're pulling off of the. It's all right. We're pulling off of the V1 node state API call. So if you wanted to also, you can certainly use the API browser in the GUI. You'd pull that up and go to V1 node, then state, and then run it there, and that should give you the same output that you'd see there.
Yeah, on this guy here, all these different API calls are available throughout this guy here as soon as they load in here. So in this particular one that we called node, if I do a search for node, then node state, there's that call right there. Because yeah, in the end, the QQ CLI is basically making a raw API call. There's like what you would do through this tab, or if you're writing a Python script or something to automate some kind of functionality, you probably would make these calls directly to the API.
And lastly, I alluded to this early on. Here's where we get fancy. In this case, we're going to create a CVS file or CSV file. Sorry, CVS is the one that gives you really long receipts, which is kind of like a really long JSON output if you think about it. CSV file for my exports. In this case, I only had 2 exports on there, so it's pretty short. But it does show you the power of with the API plus the JQ out there. You know, here I'm basically formatting output that I can just read straight into a spreadsheet at this point. Bingo, bang, boom, shakalaka. I am good and done, and everything goes home. Everyone goes home happy at that point. You can certainly change this up if you have things like quotas, for example. And I think I'm actually writing an example for that for the knowledge base article on this. Again, it'll be linked in the show notes after once this thing gets published. But it does make things very easy that you can pull up very very quick and simple. You know, you could do a quotas list quotas, which is perfectly fine. I don't know, Joe, if you have any quotas on
Yeah,
your
let me
docs.
try that. Let me try this. Username. So I'm going to log into this long running cluster that we have in house. There you go. So we're going to do QQ and quotas list quotas.
Yeah, see what we got out there.
Well, how would we find that? Let me do this number that we told you to do. We're going to say grep quota. Quota list quotas. Look at that. So me and Will, we've been doing this for a while, and we do not remember all these commands. So there's no shame in hitting -H and looking up the commands again. So there you go. These are all the quotas that are set on that cluster. Now,
Which
is there
again,
a,
you can
Mhm.
pull things out of here. You could certainly do grep on path or something like that, but it's not going to give you the nicety output, if you will. And
Mhm.
so once you do throw things into JQ, you can tell which fields you actually want to pull and parse on those, and then make something that's nice and common delimited.
So let's try to get fancy live here. I want to see what keys are inside of the quotas. So there's a whole bunch of them. Let's see what one quota looks like. And I'm going to look for the path of all of them.
So say I want path and my usage.
Okay, so let me do that again. And I'm going to put a pipe there and do path, and then comma capacity usage. And I would probably create a new object here. And I can probably do at CSV. There he goes. So now I have a
Go.
CSV that has my path and the capacity. And I can take this and open it in a spreadsheet. So that's just one quick example. I mean, JQ can be kind of infuriating at times, but once you kind of get the hang of it, it's pretty easy to figure out.
So we do have 2 questions related to quotas out here. I'm going to start at the bottom, work my way up. Can we do quota list quotas with a share name?
Per share, no, well, sort of. Now, a share itself does not have a quota, but a share has a path, right? So if I do a QQM SMB list shares, and I'm probably going to get an enormous output in this guy. So I am looking for, actually, let me cheat a little bit. I'm going to see if any of these guys match here. So I think the Lissica test right there has a related share. So you see that that particular share has a path. So, because a quota is an attribute of a path, not an attribute of a share. And in this case, I know that I have a share called, Lissica test. So I could look at a share and get all the different keys. Oh, I need to give it a dash dash JSON output if I want to do that. And I can find the different keys that I have in there. There's probably going to be a bunch of numbers, entries, entries. Let me see what keys the entries have. I have 43 different shares. So let me look at one of them, what one of them looks like. Okay, and then I have a share name. Don't forget the dot. And I have a path, comma, path. So this gives me the files has fs path, not dot path. So, I mean, I guess I could string things together and then eventually get what the quota is on a particular share. But in this case, I mean, they're kind of two parallel things and not necessarily directly related, other than they share the same path. Hopefully that helps. And hopefully my loud keyboard is not deafening everyone on the call. I might end up switching to my laptop's keyboard because it's going to be a lot quieter. Keep forgetting to use it.
All right, we had another question out there. Can you put the quotas into human readable output like gigabyte, terabyte, etc.?
Interesting. Let's see if we can do that. So if I do QQ quotas, list quotas, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. I have all these quotas and I have capacity usage. So I'm going to do JQ. Now I'm going to give you a much, much more simplified example here. So I'm going to say capacity usage, and I should get all the numbers. Actually, let me remember what the keys were again. I think it's called quotas. There you go. So I'm going to do JQ quotas. I think if I do that, I get one. Yeah. So this is all of them. And capacity usage. Right. I got all these numbers. You can pipe it down to a tool like numfmt where I'm doing this from memory, so bear with me here. I think is 2 equal SI. Oh, are you telling me this Mac doesn't have num format? Oh, NMFNT, I think. Mm-mm-mm.
No, I think it's telling you don't have num format on
I
it.
probably don't. I swear I did. There's a tool called num format, and I'm actually going to break the own rules that we said you shouldn't be doing. I'm going to SSH into a node. I really thought I had installed it on my Qumulo here. SSH admin and Qumulo test.local. All right, let me make big in this so everybody can see it. And why do you do this? Okay, so QQ quotas list.
Now, while Joe's typing here, you will notice that he did do a QQ login. So yes, he is going into API mode on the cluster itself, which is something you can also do. It does save you the grief and heartache of having to be terrified whenever you're sitting there in sudo-s or sudo qsh mode and possibly copying or pasting the wrong thing there. If I said it's never happened before, I would be lying to you, and people do it probably far more often than you'd like to think.
I had to pick an example cluster that doesn't have any quotas in it. Okay. This cluster is different, so I apologize that I have to do the thing that Will just told you not to do. So the num format tool is num fmt, that tool. That tool lets you convert some number. I'm going to say echo some number. Num fmt dash 2 equals some format, and you can actually look at the thing here, but 2 dash dash 2.
It's dash dash.
There you go. See, there you go. That converted it to a more human readable number. So you do have the ability to do this with other command line tools. Now we tend to give you just the raw tools because we're a lot of the stuff that we're building, especially if you're getting the JSON output, we're thinking of automation, and we're thinking of it being downstream of another command. So there are tools out there that will let you do the conversion for human readable. And I mean, it's maybe possible that we should be doing the actual, we should be giving you an actual human readable format in some of these other commands. Maybe it makes more sense for us to give you that. Like we tend to do that in tools that have a human readable output, but you do have the ability to kind of then convert that stuff. Any other questions with the 5 minutes we have left?
Nothing else out there. I will continue to run my gums here, and if anyone else has any questions, feel free to throw them out there. Next month we are covering multi-tenancy. Your favorite Canadian, Phil, will be back in the driver's seat for that one. So show up in the middle of next month for you, me, and multi-tenancy. And outside of that, if there are no other questions, we will let you get 4 months of your life back. And as always, if you see any talking dogs,
Michael,
be sure to feed them
Michael
tacos.
Bird has raised his hand. What is it, Michael?
Oh my gosh.
Just wanted to say excellent job, Will and Joe. Thanks again.
Thank you, Mr. Bird. I will send you that $5 into your checking account.
And as always, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to hit us up on Slack. We can get on one-on-one and go over how to do something with QQ. I mean, this webinar is definitely not meant to be an exhaustive review of the 300 plus different commands that we have. But just kind of give you a taste and just a reminder that is a really useful tool for to manage your Qumulo clusters out there.